Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentle lady from Wyoming.
All right. Thank you. Director Stone-Manning, I have visited the disaster on our southern border 3 times, and there are millions of acres of BLM lands in our southern border states, such as New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, etc. How many times have you visited the border states to find out firsthand how the invasion of illegal aliens into our country has affected those lands?
Congresswoman, I have visited the border once.
Okay. When was that?
That was in late fall of 21.
You haven't been back?
To the border, no. To the southern states, yes.
Have you, as the director of the BLM, undertaken any type of NEPA analysis to evaluate the environmental impact of uncontrollable illegal aliens crossing the border?
Congresswoman, I think you might be talking about the garbage that we were talking about earlier in the hearing. Is that what you're referring
no,
to?
I'm talking about, have you undertaken any kind of an environmental analysis to determine the impact of the horde of millions of people crossing that border illegally and crossing BLM lands? Have you done any kind of an environmental analysis to determine the impact that they are having on our federal lands?
Not to my knowledge.
Does the BLM intend to start trying to find a way to house illegal aliens on our federal lands?
Congresswoman, that is not in our mission.
Just 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to question Secretary Hageman about various Wyoming priorities, and one of which is the entire Wyoming delegation has written to you about multiple times, and that relates to the Rock Springs RMP. When I asked Secretary Hageman if she had heard about it or if she was familiar with it, she stated that she had not. Director Stone-Manning, have you read the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan?
Congresswoman, I believe the next day the secretary in a subsequent
No,
hearing...
I'm asking you. The question for you is, have you read the Rock Springs RMP?
I have read the main chapters of it, but not all the appendices.
But you have not read all of it?
Not all the appendices, no. Okay. That's what my staff does.
In Alternative B, or in that Rock Springs RMP, the BLM chose Alternative B, which would establish over 1.8 million acres as areas of critical environmental concern, and it would impact grazing as well as oil and gas development, mining, and will lead to the end of existing leases where we have productive uses that generate revenue for the state and for the nation. It destroys recreation and vehicle access and contains all sorts of broad so-called protections that aren't relevant to protecting the environment at all. In late 2023, a former BLM employee who was actually a participant in the drafting of the Rock Springs RMP testified to Wyoming's Joint Federal Natural Resources Management Committee that the BLM's preferred alternative received very little time and effort in their development. In his own words, he said, quote, "The science and the work was all done on Alternative D, as in dog. We sat down and in 1 week, we did Alternative B and C together, and after that was done, we sat down with the cooperating agencies and we spent the next 5 or 6 years developing Alternative D," end quote. Do you think it's appropriate to completely rewrite and upend the management plan for 3.6 million acres of land based on a plan that was put together in 1 week?
Congresswoman, I can't speak to a former staffer at the BLM, but I can speak to the team in Rock Springs who was working day in and day out on that plan, and
They were working on the plan, but not on Alternatives B and C.
I am, as I was saying, and I am proud of their work, and I am proud of how they are incorporating
Do
what
you
they are
believe that a
hearing.
1 week review would comply with the requirements of FLPMA?
I'm sorry, what was the
Do
question?
you believe that a 1 week review of a particular alternative for a resource management plan that would cover 3.6 million acres would satisfy the requirements of FLPMA?
Congressman, we're spending more than a week on
My
this
question
plan.
is, would a 1 week review for an alternative on a plan that covers 3.6 million acres of land satisfy the requirements of FLPMA? Clearly the answer is not, that it wouldn't, would it?
I believe it's a hypothetical question, Congresswoman.
In the first 3 years of the Biden administration, the BLM held 4 onshore oil and gas lease sales in Wyoming totaling 194,000 acres and generated $44 million in revenue. Conversely, the Trump administration held 13 lease sales over its first 3 years, leasing 2.2 million acres and generating $431 million in revenue. The BLM has brought in 1/10 of the revenue as compared to the Trump administration, and as you know, half of that revenue goes to the state of Wyoming and half of it goes to the federal government. How do you intend to replace that kind of revenue into the coffers of the federal government if you are going to deny our ability to generate revenue on 48% of the surface estate in the state of Wyoming?
Congresswoman, there are 10 million acres that are leased in this country that are not currently being used. There are over 7,000 permits to drill that are not being used.
So the answer is you don't have an answer to that question.
Congresswoman, it's not, we have 10 million acres that are not being used, that are leased. We have 7,000 permits that are not being used that the industry could use tomorrow. They're choosing
You actually
not to.
know so little about the industry that you don't even know how that system and process works. That's what's apparent by your answer to my question. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. So the issue of, Director Stone-Manning, the issue of